Welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Dams, and today we're exploring powerful ideas and meaningful stories and the authors who challenge us to think beyond the familiar. So, in today's episode, we are honored to feature author Charles A. Cottom and his thought-provoking book, Notes from Outside the Box. Now, this work invites readers to step beyond conventional perspectives and examine the human condition through a broader, more unified lens. Charles explores humanity's struggles, not as isolated conflicts, but as part of a larger creative process in what he describes as the birth pangs of a new paradigm in human evolution. Now, through reflections on knowledge, creativity, and shared human experience, Notes from Outside the Box offers a step-by-step framework, a ladder of ideas, if you will, that encourages readers to slow down, reflect, and truly digest each concept. So in this conversation, we'll discuss the ideas behind the book, Charles's lifelong journey as a seeker of knowledge, and what it means to view humanity as one people with more in common than we realize. Well, let's get into it. Charles, it's lovely to meet you. How are you doing?
That was a great introduction. Thank you, sir.
Well, I mean, I don't even know what to say because, Outside the Box offers such a radical shift in everything, really, all perspectives.
Yeah.
And, what inspired you to write this book? And, what does Outside the Box truly mean in the context of humanity and the universe?
Okay, surprisingly, this is a collection of essays I've been writing my entire life. I would have these epiphanies, and I would sit there and have an insight about this epiphany, and I'd write it down. Well, when I retired, I says, well, geez, I'm sitting around doing nothing. Maybe I could collect all these essays into a concise whole to spread a message that's very beneficial to mankind because it really suits somebody. I can prove to you that whatever is perfect.
Right.
And the nature of thinking about it. It's just the nature of how you think about the nature of perfection. But this book, that's beyond the scope of this book now, because when you think about that project of talking about the nature of perfection, with all the catastrophes and horror going on in the world now, how can you talk about the nature of perfection? I can. It's not in my first book. This is my introduction to a way of thinking about things. I'm telling people how to think about things.
Mm.
And so, I started out with one of the first things was the little drummer boy. He played his best for him. Okay. The next after that was Boy Scouts, do your best. And there's all kinds of things like that, but that's been a foundation of recognizing you do your best. If you can't do your best, and if you do your best and bad things happen, you have no control over that. You have no control. So you have to do your best. That's what you have to do. And so later on in college, after I'd served in the military and traveled around a bit and everything else, I went and took a class in philosophy and the scope of philosophical reasoning was just mind-boggling. But I was caught on one person was Immanuel Kant that had the perfect duty as the basis of his philosophy. That was a ringing point for me. I was living with this whatever is this perfect kind of thing and doing my best to avoid bad things, and that's interpersonal, social, and everything else. You do it the whole way. So there's a series of questions that I was supposed to look at. So I won't even bother with that. If you're not going to leave me lead questions to think about, then I can just rather talk about this forever. So uh, the thing was when I traveled around and I finally ended up in the military. I liked the structure of the military because all your needs were taken care of. All you had to do was do your best. You were fed, hospitalized, lodging, and everything else. So I was going to make it a military my career. I was in ROTC in high school and in college. And this was right in the Vietnam War. And so 80% of the people in ROTC were only for evading the draft. And so I was going to the ROTC at the University of California. I wasn't going to the university, but I was going to the ROTC unit because it was the closest one there, and I was in college. And after 1 year there, it's a 2 year ROTC is a 2 year junior program and a 2 year senior program, and you do the last 2 years of your senior program in the last 2 years. And so when you're an engineering major or doctor or lawyer, you have a 5 year thing. So there's a year block in between. And I was there in my second year, and all the people who were completed their first 2 years went to Vietnam. And the next year, we found out they were put on the front line, and two of them were dead.
Right.
You know, so
Wow.
I said, hmm, you know.
Mm.
So when I got drafted, I said, I'm not going to go there. I just went down and enlisted in the military. I always wanted to jump from a plane, and I wanted to learn how to run a radio. And so I said, I wanted to go to the jump school I went down to enlist in the Army and go to the jump school. And so he says, that's fine, everything else, but you wear glasses, so you can't go to jump to it's not a thing. So I says, well, geez, that's kind of strange. Anyway, he looked through his regs. Oh, there is one thing you can do is radio teletype operator. So here's one of those paradigm moments.
Mm.
The only thing I wanted to do in the military was jump from a airplane because that's an exciting thing to do and let them pay for it, you know. And the
Wow.
only thing I wanted to do as a career was work on radios and stuff like that. When I was in Boy Scouts, I liked the Morse code. So I went to when I got drafted, I already knew Morse code, you know. So I passed the technological thing for radio, and I jump school. We were running around the track in jump school to exercise and everything else just for basic training. And there'd be a sergeant coming along. Anybody wants to volunteer for jump school, come to me. And I said, damn, there, I just wasted my enlistment thing there because I could have gone any place in the world if I just let them draft me. I ended up and going to jump school anyway, you know, but I
Right.
did that. Now, the thing about jump school is you have to have legs of iron because you have to carry an 80-pound back on your life. You have to jump from a plane and you have to hit the ground. And so you have 2 months of training of how to hit the ground, you know. So you
Yeah.
throw a twist and roll and everything else. And it was fascinating. But there was an hour of calisthenics. You had to be able to have strong legs. And so, man, oh man, that was 2 months of hell. To get into jump school, you can't even get into jump school unless you can do 80 deep knee bends in 1 minute. And so I was
Wow.
going to sergeant, they get the sergeant there and he's got a stopwatch. Go! And so you down and down and down and down as fast as you can. After about 55 of you saying, holy story, your legs are about cracking. I came up on the last one with the last bounce of my energy. I pushed up, right? He says, 80. And I was done. He says, okay, you passed. But
Mm.
I was at the limit of not passing. That's my point. So I'm sitting there running along around the track, and there's a whole group of 50 guys in a class or something like that. And there's a drill sergeant in front. He's going, I want to be, and just bouncing along, singing, and we're good, just barely. And that's after getting in with being able to do. I couldn't even run 5 miles. When I got the first time I ran the 5 miles, I just passed on the grass. I was okay. I'm out of here. I'm washed out. And I looked back, and half the guys had passed out on the ground, we hadn't passed out. We just failed out on the ground,
Sure.
got back and could carried on and stuff like that. But that was a dynamic where I tested my character the most. I never, and after passing that, there was nothing. That was a point where I realized there was nothing I couldn't do.
Mm.
If I could do that, I could do anything. And so I ended up in the 82nd Airborne Division in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as a radio operator. And that was I was enlisted, so I had 3 years of term, and I said, "Geez, I'm going to be in the 82nd Airborne for 3 years." You get up in the morning and you do this and this and this, and every day we go out and check the vehicles. We stand in front of the Jeep with our radios on the back, and we say, check the horns. Everybody going beep, 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 beep down the line. Check the tires. Check the oils. Every day we did that. And then we'd have to touch up the paints. We had so many dark colors of olive drab paint on those trailers. They were almost camouflaged by the time we got done touching up the paint. And
Right.
so I put up that for a while. And after 6 months, they had a thing of volunteering to go to Korea. So I said, oh, that's for me. I'm out of here, baby. you know. So I volunteered for Korea, went over to Korea, and I was stationed at Camp Page, North Carolina, Camp Page, Chuncheon, Korea. And what an amazing experience that was. I'm a non-social person, so I don't socialize with people. I mean, even now I don't socialize with people. I know my neighbors, that's about it, you know. And so I was there and I would spend a time going out into town experimenting in experiencing the country, this stuff like that. And there was Katuzas, Koreans attached to the United States Army. And so I went out with one of the Katuzas and I learned a little bit of Korean. Annyeonghaseyo. Most important is, don't forget this, Banjo Orikaseo. Where's the bathroom?
Ah,
Where's the bathroom? You go to any country. I learned how to say, where's the bathroom in German, in French, in any
that's a
language
good
you
point.
learn. Where's the bathroom? That's the most embarrassing thing. Where's the bathroom? And you don't know English, you're in trouble, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Mm.
So that was one of the things. I learned to speak a little bit English, and it was amazing to me that when you the GIs over in Korea, I could tell you horrific stories of things they did there. I mean, just humiliating to be an American associated to them. I just didn't want to even associate with them.
Mm.
Um, but anyway, when you learned a little bit of language, they were just amazed that there was a gay gene, which is a foreigner, that was civilized. Now, here's these people living in mud wattle houses with thatch roofs, and they have no conclusion that they've lived that way for 20. Their civilization goes back 2,500 years. They were doing rice paddies long before they had civilization. That's 500 years BC, baby.
Right.
And so here's this culture that's been living in these mud wattle houses forever, been making those rice paddies that go tear us up forever, for longer than we can imagine. They were built half the time to the Crusades, that was, that was later. These
Mm.
were, they were 1,500 years old when the Crusades took place. And these are people living exactly the same way. Now, to me, that was a statement of stability. Okay. Um, they lived in mud wall houses. Now, you sit there and look at a house that's mud walls, and you look at the thatch roof, and they'd have a little doorway 3 foot wide with a cloth over it and stuff like that. There'd be a pile of poop in the front yard, rice paddies that smelled like poop in the springtime. Always that the whole family'd be out there planting these little stalks of greens in the ground, and whoop, the thing would come up, and they'd have rice all the time, and they did that every year. Every year, they'd have a collection of houses spread out over the whole place, and so they'd fix the walls on this one year and the roof on this one the next year, and then the things on that. So they had a cycle, and every 5 years, all the houses got rethatched and repainted in their thatch back. Now, I spoke the language, was on friendly basis with some people, and they invited me into those thatch houses. You go in there, they got oilcloth on the floor, they've got black enameled cabinets with gold filigree on them. They've got all you can't believe the difference between crawling through this little hole and seeing mind blowing. It'd be like going in Tut's tomb, and seeing that what was in there, and that's just the way they live. And so they're coming out and dealing with these barbarian soldiers, and I'm seeing another whole side of the culture. I
Yeah.
mean, I experienced that because I didn't socialize like they did. I was going out to the bar clubs every night and just making bad names for Americans. No, brother, give me a break. Turn off. I don't
Yeah.
turn. So anyway, and one time I was going up. I traveled around a lot by myself because I could speak Korean, and so I was traveling up this long trail, been hiking all day. But it was a well-beaten trail. It was about, a foot wide or something like that, and I went up this mountainside, going up and up and up and up, and I came halfway up the hill. There was a little Buddha set by the side. It's only about a foot tall,
Mm.
and it had 3 layers of paint in it. You see red paint on top of gold paint, on top of red paint, and white paint on top of that, and it was all flaking, so it had been there for a long time. And a little trickle of water. It was built on a little rock next to a trickle of water coming down off the mountainside. And the thing that struck me was in front of that Buddha was a little strip of flour, a piece of fruit, and a vegetable, piece of root. It was still being worshipped in that state at that mine. So I continued up the trailer a little bit wiser, and I came to a rice paddy up in this flattened area up at the top, halfway up the mountain, and there was an old man sitting over there, and was right by lunchtime, and he was carving up a root, one of the, I forget what it's called now. It wasn't the chalk boy, I remember the name of that, but it was something like that. And he looked up and he saw me there, and his eyes got big, and he got scared half to death and stuff like that, and I just said, I put up my hands and I says, Annyeonghaseyo. The sun came out on his face.
Right.
Here is a stranger that could say Annyeonghaseyo. Hello, how are you doing? Now there's two ways to say it. You say Annyeonghash if you're talking to your buddy. You
Mm.
know, Annyeonghaseyo is how are you doing today? And so I asked him in a very polite and formal way, how are you doing today? He brings and he motioned me across a little tiny path over to his thing, and he shared his route with me, and I tried to give him some of my trail mix. And no, he didn't want the trail mix. But anyway, we had a little conversation, as much as I could do, which wasn't much, but it was it was pleasant. It was one of my life experiences, and that's what went into my book. Here was somebody that lived in a mud wattle. He had a mud wattle. He was right in front of his mud wattle house, and he lived like that forever.
Mm.
And when I compare that in my down times, I would compare that to what I lived at like, what civilization looks, and the arrogance of that. Just the arrogance that, I mean, that was Korea was 2,500 years. China's older than that,
Mm.
you know. And so later on, I'm changing the subject here a little bit. Later on, it's in the same link, but later on, I saw a newspaper. It's a big earthquake in Western China, way out in the boondocks, almost in Iraq, and the news media flocked in to see how the peasants were doing, and they actually had one guy there with a camera and a crew and everything else and a translator, and there was this old guy. I mean, he was really old, and he was putting a lintel back on the stacked up stones from his house. Now here they didn't have enough water to make mud wattle houses. They didn't have enough anything to do that, so they built everything out of stone. And well, the earthquake collapsed it to the ground. So all he was doing was putting it back together, and the guy with the camera's got the camera in his face and his mic in his face, and he's politely stopped to look at him, what do you want and stuff like that. And they asked, well, what are you doing? And he looked at him like they translated that. What are you doing? And he says, well, I'm rebuilding my house. I just got done burying my wife and I'm rebuilding my house. And so here is this newsman travel halfway across the world to get the native feeling about an earthquake and collapse and destruction. And he says, I'm building. He was probably wondering why you're not helping me build the house. No,
Wow.
but
Yeah.
that's what he was saying. And I saw that and related it to my Korean experience. And I realized that separation between civilizations was just enormous. I mean, I relate that to what's happening in Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and Europe. Later on, I took my mom to Europe. She was 88 years old, and she'd always wanted to go see the homeland, And so I said, Mom, we can always go to Korea. We can always go to Europe. I'll just take you there. And she says, well, I can't fly in a plane. We said, we won't take a plane. I don't like to fly in a plane. And so she says, well, we'll take a ship. And he says, well, we can't. We'd have to get to the ship. We can't drive all the way to the ship. I said, we'll take the train to the ship. She likes to ride trains. Anyway, to make a long story short, we took the train to New York, jumped on the ship, drove it over thing, and we spent 2 months in Europe. And once again, she could speak French.
Right.
She was not speaking French. But the thing was, we were greeted as Americans, arrogant Americans,
Mm.
But then when we sat there, we weren't going to the high class hotels. We weren't going and spending a lot of money on social stuff and things like that. We went to the first place we stayed was a student quarters or one of those transient quarters. We go there and you take a room, and that's all you have, a room. The bathroom's down the hall, and eat downstairs with everybody, right? And it was a wonderful experience. We sat there and got the mom got brief conversation with people. I'm not very social. I was polite, but I wasn't social. And so that was good. And we got on a train, and you can't believe the difference in area there. We got on a train in London, and 4 hours later, we were in Edinburgh. I mean, that was amazing. That was amazing. Not flying, I didn't, just taking the train. 4 hours later, we're walking in the streets of Edinburgh. My mom had dreamed about doing that her whole life and couldn't believe she was there. And
Wow.
so we stayed in a place close to the station was kind of pricey, so we went and found another place. There's a housing place we could go, an office that dealt with travelers, and went down and stayed there. It had washing machines and dryers and whole 9 yards, and was half the price of a hotel. And we're living with people who lived, wasn't a fancy place at all, and it had the transportation out there. We walked around, we saw the Queen's yacht that was last parked there and stuff like that. And ended up going down. We were there doing genealogy research, so we went down to oh, what was the name of that? I don't remember. It's being one of the
In
glass.
London.
Yeah. So we went down there and we stayed
Yeah.
in and we stayed in Paisley.
Ah,
And we got off the train in Paisley, went to the station. Where's the hotels around here? Where we stay? When Mom and I, she was 88 years old and I was 60, so we were old geezers ourselves.
yeah.
And the lady, well, the only one I know was about down this way. And so we went down that way and then finally found the hotel, and it was nice. They put us up in a room there and had the breakfast downstairs every year and all that stuff. And so we stayed there 2 weeks, and Mom went around to the genealogy place because her family came from Paisley area,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is south of Glasgow. Yeah, what's the name of this town? It was Glasgow. It was south of Glasgow.
Mm.
And while we were there, we took the train out to the cove. We went here and we went there. We had a grand experience, but we always met people because we weren't tourists. We weren't tourists, and it just changed the whole venue of conversation and interaction and stuff like that. We could talk to people and everything else because we were them. We were like them. And that's all part of the equation that came into writing this book. But I wrote the book before we went to Europe. But writing the book was an eye opener. I mean, it confirmed everything. My kids were sitting there when I was writing this book. My kids were on the computer playing games with people in Russia and China. You know,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
would know that because they'd be talking back and forth, but the game program would change the language, and so you see translated English. And we know that they'd be getting translated English, but that's where I got the idea of the unity of everything. There's a superficial thing that's manufactured by, I don't know, it's manufactured mostly by media, a fantasy. But the
Mm.
people aren't, most of the people we talked to didn't even read newspapers, didn't have fantasy or anything. They were just treating us as a thing. We went down and took the Harry Potter train from Glasgow all the way out to Westman or wherever the end of the line was. And we got off there, and when we went to have a meal, and the meal took so long, and I think it was on purpose because we were nice people, but um, we got back to the train too late, and there was 5 taxi cab drivers waiting there, waiting. I said, "Oh, I see this picture." And so I went over and talked to one of the guys. We got to go back to Glasgow by this evening, and he probably, "Oh, no, no problem with that," and everything else. So I got done with the trip, and they don't accept tips. Nobody accepts tips in England. And
Mm.
so we went with, and I gave him oh, 15, well, $15 or something like that. He came about 50 miles. It was a long cab trip. It was at night. And he says, "Oh, no, I don't accept it." I looked at him. I said, "This isn't a tip. This is for your wife that's sitting here holding your dinner at home." His eyes lit up like a light, and he accepted the money for his wife.
Mm.
That was one of my life experiences. I mean, and that was after I wrote the book. This is the process of coming to find the nature of perfection in everything you do. And you win more by being nice than you possibly can by being bad. And that's the way everybody is. I'd say 80% of the people in the world, the silent majority, I call them, are nice, good people. And that's what is happening now in the world is that door is opening. For the first time, that door is opening. You can go in other parts of the country and be accepted and acknowledge that they're not aliens, they're not something else. And I realized that when one of the astronauts was up in the space station and he looked down at the planet and he says, there was no national boundaries. I didn't know what part of the planet I was looking at, you know? And so that was an epiphany for me. There is no boundaries. All the boundaries between our civilization all the way down the line is based upon superficial separation. You know, language has become, when we went over there, we went to any place we went, they would understand English because English has been spread all over the world, any place. But the other language is a little bit less. I could understand a little bit of French. I couldn't even understand some of the English spoken in Great Britain, but it was enough, you
Yeah.
know. And it doesn't take much to open the door to the nice people in the world. And so when all you read on the news, in the newspaper and on the news is how horrible everything is, that's just not where humanity is now. We are on the paradigm thing of changing that because we can communicate and see the truth in one another. And I sit there and hear about Putin and doing this and doing this and this. I'm identifying with the soldiers that have to deal with that. I'm dealing with the people that have to deal with that. How do you make that end? How do you make that end? The Russian people are living horribly by our standards. The communes were just terrible. And the communes that were in Israel are disappearing because the commune only lasts 3 generations. The kids go when mom and dad start the thing, the kids go on, and after that, it's gone, you know? And so um, that's a part of it.
Is
We have it, yeah.
sorry. Excuse me, excuse me. Um, yes, I mean, I think this is the thing. Obviously, you've said quite a bit there about how your life has sort of impacted you and drawn you towards writing the book and things like that, which is understandable, and it's really good. It's really interesting, and I agree with what you're saying about people are generally good and genuinely good as well, right? And if you treat people well, then you hope to receive that back, don't you? So you make an effort, and people will tend to do the same thing. So in the book, you're talking about human evolution, and it's the same, and it connects with the same creative process that formed the stars and, well, life itself. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's the basis. When you
yeah,
sit there and look at the planet from up there. Now, this was before then. I was a science fiction reader, and
right.
I was also went to Catholic school for 2 years. And one of the epiphanies there is was praying, doing all this stuff and everything else. We had to do the Stations of the Cross. And I always saw that guy hanging from the cross, and I was like, God, that's really horrible. I didn't even want to look at it. And after about doing that 4 times, I looked and I says, my God, that's the Son of God.
Mm.
That's the Son of God. We did that to the Son of God, you know. And that was a big epiphany for me. I was in the fourth grade then, that was part of one of the major things of my life. And I started reading science fiction. I'd read all these stories about different civilizations and other parts of the universe, type of thing, different things. And they were all based upon this idea of good versus bad, the evil lizard type people coming to
Mm.
devour us, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So, um, yeah, that was a paradigm moment because you sit there and realized how superficial that thing is when you're talking about a Buddhist that's been a civilization that's 2,500 years old, older than 2,500 years. There was a
Mhm.
500 BC when their first civilization started. And you compare that to the religion, and the thing is about what religion does is it gives people hope when all there is despair.
Yeah.
They can look to the future. And that's you can't fault that. I cannot fault that at all. You know, we need that.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that's happening now is we're going beyond that paradigm of need to seeing a broader context. We're seeing context of the Indian civic relationship, the Buddhism, and all these religious people that are just as good as we are. There's a broadening. The kids playing on the computers and stuff like. There's a broadening of the paradigm. You know, people are not isolated now. They're not going to a strange land and finding a new people. That's
Mm.
all gone. We're on a new thing. We're so cramped here now. We're building spaceships to go up into space. What's that all about? It's the same thing that we've been doing all along,
Oh,
And
exactly.
what are we going to find? Are we going to find other life? We don't even know if we're going to find other living matter that's like us, let alone intelligent living matter. And the thing is, this is on the next book, but we're not even cognizant of what the depth of space is. You know, we look at the light from the other side of the universe. This isn't in my book, it's in one of my future books. On the other side of the universe, we don't realize we're looking at those star systems and trying to listen to their radio signals from 25,000 years ago, because that's how long it took the light to get to us, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. It's madness.
So, when you talk about the paradigm moment, there is a definite paradigm moment opening now.
Well,
And
this
I'm
is
a
the thing. Exactly, Chelsea. I mean, you've said that, you point out that human history, as you've been saying, is
yeah,
well, 2,500 years for the Buddhists in terms of their own civilization, but what we can
yeah,
say about 10,000 years or so. So
yeah.
comparing that to the millions and billions of years of cosmic
I know.
evolution,
It's the mind scoping, yeah.
yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, when you look at a galaxy and you think that the light left there 10 million
I
years
know, yeah.
ago, you just
Yeah.
yeah, it's so difficult. So how
You
does this
can
perspective then change how we should view our current stage of development then? Because you've said that obviously
with
we understand.
humbleness, not with this arrogance. We, especially Americans, have this arrogance they just carry with them because they saved the world in World War II. World War II in 100 years from now will be a matter of history, and all our arrogance will be gone, you
Mm,
know? And that's being facilitated by the fact that we are opening up the world to things now. There is transportation and communication and interchange and stuff like that. And when we look at we have to look at it from outside, from way outside the box. Outside the box was from the astronaut's viewpoint, but way outside the box is from the whole thing. We are just a speck of nothing in the expansive space, and we're going to be that way for the next 100,000 years at least until we can find a way to get there.
exactly. So how
And
do you think then that this sort of now that we can create things, that didn't exist before, we've gone beyond
oh, creation,
subsistence, you know,
yeah.
how's that going to affect how we see ourselves in the universe? And then what happens, I guess, is something else you're thinking about, is if we do find some sort of life somewhere, I mean,
We
how
rest
do we put all that together?
we talk about the laws of, in my book, I talk about the laws of science and the laws of intangibility, because that's been the big thing. Science has lorded over faith because you can just believe that. You can believe anything you want. Look what they believe over
Mm,
here, what they believe over here, what they believe over here. But we're on science, baby. But there is a science there is absolute truths of the intangible too. I mean, if you go to, well, it has to go back. I'll take a step back to the um, process of getting the ability to think like that was
mm,
based upon a creativity. We're the first ones that can create that which did not exist before. And so that takes place because we had a mental gift that just sort of grew, and we're finding out that a lot of animals have the same ability, they just can't communicate it. Am I running out of time?
well, no, I was, yeah, I keep looking because I'm trying to find something that you've just sort of hit the nail on the head there. I mean, basically, you're saying that animals can also do this, but they can't communicate it, which is really quite
Right.
interesting, right? Because then
We
we're
can't,
talking
we
about
can't.
consciousness and things like that as
Right.
well, then, aren't we?
Right. That's exactly right. So, um, there was a process of that where curiosity, all animals have curiosity. They're curious,
True.
what's wiggling in the bush over here? What's doing this over here? What's doing, so they have curiosity. And then they have limited imagination. It's a predator or it's a food. It depends on where they're on the, or where they're in the food chain. And but after that, they can't go into creating that which did not exist before. That's what we started to do. And what triggered that? I have no, that's where the secret comes in, and that's where the divine and the intangible comes in, because even the best scientists don't know how we got that creativity thing. See,
Mm,
there's the unknown of science. And yet we know that if there's intelligent being that can think and can create, if we go to another solar system and find a creature that can create like we can, they will know love. They will know truth. They will know honor. They will know justice. Those are the laws of faith. they're cast in concrete laws, and we all know those. But the scientist doesn't want to get confused by that, so they're going to focus on their um, science, scientific results and stuff like that. But the rest of the people have to go to church and have to do this and have to do that. But they're living on the same powerful laws, probably even more powerful, because I think love came before fire. I think trust came before fire. I think all these things predated fire, and they created the ability to make fire, to
Mm.
recognize fire as being beneficial. So that was what the whole thing of the book was: tell people how to con control. The thing, my introduction is the forward says, whatever is perfect. There's no mistake. God makes no mistakes. Everything we experience is the perfect consequence of the decisions we make individually and collectively. Okay, that was going to be the first chapter, but then I realized that is such a broad context, I couldn't do it in a bunch of brief little paragraphs and stuff like that. But I had to talk about how to think about that. How do you think about creativity? How does that significant with love? How is that compared to all the chapters in the book? So when I sit there and talk about I could arrange those chapters any way I wanted to. And so I arranged them so that the tangibility issue, the primary issue, would be in the center of the book. And then it will wind down from there. And so I build it up to go to the thing. But I tell people to read it by rungs because there is a process of going if you read one chapter, but I can't even read the book now. I
Right.
can't even read the book now because it is dense, and I'm always been thinking that's why nobody wants to spend $25 on a dense book. I can understand that, but they're not buying at $3 on the e-version either, you
Right.
know. And so um, the idea is getting that process out so that people can grasp the nature of it. I couldn't talk the idea of the nature of perfection. I couldn't even talk about the nature of it because I don't remember I was.
Oh, I think, well, I think what you were really talking about there was explaining how nature
I
and
was talking about the ladders.
yes,
The
the
ladders.
ladders,
Okay,
exactly.
yeah, right. So when I was sitting there making up the ladders, I had to make a process. I had to start with the fundamentals, how do we create? What is that process of creation? And so that's one of the keystone things. And it's early on in the book.
Mm.
We can create that which did not exist before. That was our big thing. And we've gone to the moon with that.
Yeah.
There's no animal we know of, no matter how much curiosity and everything else they have, they can't go to the moon. They can't turn a stone into a sword. They
Mm.
can't build plowshares and then turn the plowshares into a sword and hack up their neighbors. So
Yeah.
that's what we can do. And so that's where good and evil comes from because people make swords and take stuff that they didn't create. And that's
Mm.
what they made weapons for. They ran out of food, so they go over to the neighbors that had food and take it away. That's
Yeah.
what they would do. And that's what the discord is all about. And so we had to come up with an idea of good and bad because the bad people took and the good people gave. And so giving is a blessing.
Yeah.
But that comes back to bite you. So anyway,
No, no, I see. I understand what you mean. I think it's interesting. When you were talking earlier on about how kind of religion pushes, or rather, if we don't look at things in a scientific way, then it's very, I guess, old-fashioned. Really, is what you were kind of saying. Now that we are in a scientific paradigm, is that the right word? But the right sort of scientific sphere, yeah. And because scientists will say that, oh, the reason for the way that the humans have evolved and consciousness and that stuff is because we started to eat high protein food because we've discovered fire. But what you're saying is, we were doing all of those things before fire, all the
yeah,
emotional parts
yeah,
of
right,
things,
right.
which is
It
really
wouldn't have,
quite interesting, really. So,
yeah.
how do you think your readers can actually apply the ideas from each one of the rungs on your ladder then, without feeling like there's too much going on? You've mentioned like how in
That's
depth
why I said you
everything
do it
is.
one strung at a time because when you sit there and read the first chapter and it talks about, I don't even know what the first chapter is, it talks about stuff like that. And then you read the second chapter, I can go 3 chapters and my brain is spreading out over so many subjects from that thing. It's
Mm.
gone in so many directions. I can't put it all back together. So the way you look at the book, you're looking at it at rungs, but you look at it as pieces of a puzzle. So every step you're going on is a piece of a puzzle, like going into an Egyptian tomb or something like that. And so you could put all the chapters out on a table as a deck of cards, and you could pick up those three, or these three, or those three, and you get a different message from the same cards. But if you looked at them, you have to have a way to organize that stuff. And so I've organized it in a range of how to arrange the things. These are the pinks, these are the reds, these are the blues, these are the greens. And then you could sort of go up the ladder, a rainbow ladder of, say, of just incorporating these ideas as separate combinations. I mean, there was one chapter on oh, what were the curiosity, imagination, ingenuity, and creation.
Right.
Those are the four steps. That's four chapters right there, and you could put those together and you come up with what I think is a very accurate thing of how humble we should be about this. I mean, we're arrogant about it. Shouldn't be arrogant about it. We should be humble about it. And I'm
Mm.
seeing that now. You're seeing people being more humble about that. They're noticing that porpoises save fishermen and swimmers that get lost. They're finding out um, that other animals, that a lion will care for you if you're wounded, if they're not hungry. They'll care
Yeah.
if you're wounded, but there are certain things over, but we're seeing that, we're noticing that. We've got that woman that spent all those times with the gorillas
Mm.
in Africa and stuff like that, and it's going on. All of things like that are going on over the world, and that's fine. She would have been. We've heard about Tarzan forever. She's the Tarzan of now. The things that used to be an imaginary man living in the jungle, she lived in the jungle. That's reality now. We're coming into this paradigm thing of all these things, all these possibilities happening. We have Disneyland fantasies of porpoises and stuff like that. And now we're friends with porpoises. They save us in catastrophes and stuff like that. And then we
Yeah.
have the backward people that sit there and say, "Oh, we have to free the porpoises." I says, "What do you mean you have to free the porpoises? The porpoises are the king of things. They're at the biggest luxury resort for porpoises in the world. I mean, the porpoises out in the ocean. Listen, how happy they are when they fly through the air and getting all the fish. They're jealous. They're a little scared. They don't want to go in there because they're scared. They're wild porpoises." But they've got a sense of that's something pretty good going on there. I mean, George has been screaming all for 5 years now,
Yeah.
he's still doing in good shape. And so that's what's happening. Well, we don't realize that, but it's part of the realize that if they're going to sit there and say, "Oh, we have to free the porpoises," they freed some porpoises over in the Mediterranean Sea with tables on them. One of them lost it within a week or something like that. One of them went into a pod and was wholly not accepted by the pod because it couldn't communicate. It wasn't part of the pod. It
Mm.
just sort of was a hanger on. So here was some porpoise that was in the kingdom and was thrown out into the ocean. It's like, what did I do wrong? And we have no clue about thinking like that. There's a branch of humanity that doesn't think about that.
Yeah,
And
well,
yet,
I think that's most humanity, Charles, right? So,
yeah,
that's and I include myself. I'm now going to think like that.
yeah,
Just listening to
yeah.
what you're saying. So, is this the way that you're hoping that humanity sort
This
of
is
changes?
exactly what I want to do. There's a paradigm going on here. It covers all of these things, and
Mm.
this is the way to look at them. One of the things was about the chapter about a child, an unborn child living in its mother. Um, we know that that child can see shades of light, and we know it can hear sounds. And so one child grows up in a mud wattle house, hearing murmuring voices, maybe daddy yelling once in a while, and all these things. And he goes when he's born and goes into that thing, he's familiar with it already. And if you have somebody born in a city and goes and doesn't even isn't even born at home, is born in a hospital, that's a big difference to a newborn child. What about the ones that are born into royalty, and the ones in China where they used to take the poop from the emperor to make sure he was healthy, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, you're feeding him right. We don't have to change his diet at all." I mean, there's a paradigm there of historical information that is being totally disconnected, so that the unity is not there. We don't have that paradigm of recognizing that, and that's why I wanted to bring up. It's that we have more in common than we have separate. That's the bottom line.
I love that message because it's actually really simple. But if you actually think about it, I mean, everyone can say we've got more in common, right? But if you think about it in the way that you've put it, I think that it makes a lot of sense. It really does. But Charles, we are actually running out of time now. Sorry.
It's the context of it too. It has to be the context of what you're thinking and stuff. So that was what the message is to be about. It's open door. Whatever is perfect. There is no doubt about that.
No. So what's the main message that you want your readers to take out of, from outside the box?
Understand the nature of perfection.
Which we're going to try to do, right? This is what you started us on that road. You mentioned
that would just shut the door right there, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you understood it,
that would just shut the door.
Yeah.
Things are not perfect.
No.
So I had to create a foundation for just demonstrating how the things are perfect. We do have a sense of curiosity. We do have this happening. This is the nature of science and faith. Faith is just as powerful, probably more powerful than science is. There wouldn't be science without faith. In the last book, I talk about the actualization of science. They're finding out that the universe is totally amorphous until we measure it. Until we measure it, it doesn't exist. And so we are creating the reality we live moment by moment ourselves by the decisions we make with our senses. That's in the other books if I ever get around to writing them. But
I was going to ask.
So this is supposed. I thought this book was going to fly, and I wrote it up with the idea for the next book is going to be notes from far inside the box. What are the quantum processes of mind? And where does mind has to be one of the primary things dealing with these paradigm functions. It's this nature of mind, of how the mind is improving and adapting and stuff like that. Scientists still don't know how that happens. They don't know how that happens.
No, they can go on about synapses and all that sort of stuff in the brain.
That's right. They know the physics of it. They know the physics is all the way down to the cell. But how can that come up with creativity? Duh, there's nothing.
Exactly. And imagine the time when we do understand that. And then we can do all sorts of other things.
We're on the part of the paradigm is now. I find it amazing. We're creating computers that can answer all those questions. This is the fruition. I'm living this long to find the fruition of the paradigm of AI answering any question about anything and inventing questions we haven't even asked yet.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're on a path now, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And it's
listen, Charles, we could talk for ages and ages and ages, right? Obviously. But thank you very much for joining us on the BrightWord Books podcast today and for spending this time, with us. Charles A. Cottom, thank you very much. And as we explored the ideas behind notes from outside the box, remember, everybody, that today's discussion reminded us that, understanding humanity may require you stepping beyond familiar boundaries and approaching knowledge with patience, openness, and reflection, one rung at a time, as you mentioned, Charles, right? So if this conversation resonated with you, we encourage you to explore Charles's book and reflect on the insights at your own pace. There's a lot to think about here, and there's a lot to change, right? Be sure to subscribe to the BrightWord Books podcast for more conversations with authors who challenge perspectives and illuminate new ways of thinking. So until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep discovering the world beyond the box. Charles Cottom, thank you very much for joining us. It's been fantastic.